a nightmare to others!
Oh Lord! Oh Jesus Christ!
But I will give you a message. The message of death!
Oh yes! Come out to play.
Make no attempt to capture them. They are to be exterminated.
Matron, take them away!
Dada speaks to you.
What's your fucking game, shithead? Shithead? What's a shithead?
Hello there. Well, welcome to another season of We Need to Talk About ... Season 5. Season 5, Luke, we are doing this.
Why haven't you stopped us?
Which just goes to show that people watch any old rubbish on YouTube.
Basically, you know, when I say why haven't you stopped us, that's not just a question for YouTube. It's probably a question for our wives as well.
Yes, yes. Well, we're back for another season of your favourite middle-aged movie boys talking about classic cult and film and TV from across the decades. I see that you have unfurled your sleeping bag, Luke, and are ready to do another episode of this here show that we do on the interwebs type thing.
Yes, I mean, I never actually leave We Need to Talk About Towers after the Christmas special, so the only time we go out is, you know, to the pub and back.
That's not true. I let you out when I unlocked the door to the bunker.
Yes, but that's forced imprisonment.
Well, I left you some food beforehand, didn't I?
Food? It was crackers.
Well, sustenance.
True, but it would be nice to go home at some point.
Anyway, maybe one day. Let's start the show, shall we? I am the Big Daddy D, David Mabley, and greetings, Highlander. You called?
And I am Luke Murphy, and we are joined in a way that can never be broken. When you need me, you'll only have to call my name. I'll always find you.
It sounds like magic.
Oh, it is.
Kind of.
If there is one recurring theme that we have throughout this here programme, is that we cover films that have just as colourful a story going on behind the scenes as it did in front of the cameras, and we have covered films where directors, writers and even actors walked out on the production and never came back, as seen with the original 1967 version of Casino Royale, or the finished film being absolutely cut to ribbons by a producer with an agenda, and then parts of the footage being used as landfill for the M3 motorway, like we saw with the original Wicker Man. And in terms of a film having a troublesome production and post-production history, today's film is one of the most notorious.
Oh dear. Well, are you sitting comfortably? Well, then I'll begin. Once upon a time, 1986 to be precise, there was a fantasy action-adventure film called Highlander, which told the story of a Scottish swordsman born in the year 1518 that finds out he is in fact immortal, as you do, and that there are several other immortals just like him, including an evil villain who must battle throughout the centuries until there is only one of them left. It was a film that successfully told its story from start to finish and left extraordinarily little opportunity for a follow-up. In fact, so logical and satisfying a conclusion that Highlander had, any poor bugger that found themselves having to work on a sequel was really going to have to work hard to earn their paycheck, especially when the ongoing theme throughout the film was, there can be only one.
There can be only one. No! Can be only one.
There can only be one. Only one what?
There can be only one. There can be only one.
There can be only one.
Unfortunately, the franchise did not listen to its own advice.
Highlander, the first one, was a thoroughly enjoyable sword and sorcery romp with a well-told story that had been wrapped up to the point where there was no obvious path to a sequel. The film hadn't exactly set the box office on fire in America, mainly due to 20th Century Fox failing to market the movie in any significant way. I mean, the poster was literally just a black and white close-up of Christopher Lambert's face, with nothing to indicate what the film was actually about. However, following the film's release on good old VHS and Laserdisc, it quickly became a cult classic and would become particularly successful across Europe.
So successful, in fact, that the producers of the series, Bill Panzer and Peter Davis, would begin to get demands from distributors asking them when a sequel was going to come out. They felt that audiences would pay good money to see more of the adventures of a Frenchman pretending to be a Scotsman and a Scotsman pretending to be an Egyptian with a Spanish name and a Japanese sword, because, damn it, somehow it worked the first time round.
Panzer and Davies kept reiterating that Highlander was a one-off movie. Its story had already been told and had clearly ended with no possible options for a sequel. It's done. There is now only one. And besides which, the original film's director, Russell Mulcahy, did not want to make a second movie anyway. But the financiers kept replying with you'll think of something. In the end, the money talked, and work began on a sequel. However, that same money would then seemingly disappear overnight, when the country that the sequel was being filmed in, Argentina, saw its entire economy crash.
Now, normally, this is where we would give a brief synopsis about the film, but I think we first need to give a brief synopsis about the first film, just so you get more context, appreciation, and an understanding of just how much of a sequel this is. Now, this won't be a full review, as I have already covered Highlander 1 on my channel a few years ago. In fact, I actually ended up on the telly because of it.
Oh God, you did, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Hello there, El Rey Network.
You know, on paper, this shouldn't have worked. Christopher Lambert is a Frenchman playing a Scottishman and was literally learning how to speak English as the film was being shot.
It's a kind of magic.
He does have one of the most infectious laughs I've ever heard. Scottishman playing a Spaniard that is also Egyptian.
You're a liar. You said you were from Spain.
Nastiest villain of 1980s cinema. He's the voice of Mr. Krabs. SpongeBob, me boy!
So that's my claim to fame, is that?
So, the first film covers a group of beings who are immortal. There is one Highlander, because he comes from the Highlands of Scotland. Now, remember that, because this is going to be worth keeping in mind. Throughout history, the immortals compete against each other until there is only one left, with the winner receiving something called the prize, which is something that is mostly unknown, but it is believed to be a source of great power and knowledge. The only way to kill an immortal is to behead them. So, all the immortals tend to carry really great big swords around with them at all times, as you do.
When an immortal is able to vanquish another, they will receive their power and become more and more stronger. The moment when an immortal gains the power of another is known as the Quickening, and immortals can even use this same power to sense when another one of them is nearby. Eventually, the few that are left will be drawn to a distant land, which turns out to be America, funnily enough. And they will come together for something that is referred to as the Gathering, where they will battle to the last until there is only one.
And as mentioned earlier, the phrase, "there can be only one," is something that is repeated throughout the first film, although this is quickly abandoned when the sequels come along, and the television series, and the animated series. But we're really getting ahead of ourselves. Here, the first Highlander movie has a split narrative between New York in 1985, which follows Conor McLeod towards the end of this immortal contest, where a showdown against his old adversary, the Kurgan, is drawing closer and closer. The Kurgan is played with great relish by Clancy Brown, who is lots and lots of fun in this. And yes, this was years before he ended up doing the voice of Mr. Krabs in SpongeBob SquarePants.
Happy Halloween, ladies.
The narrative also cuts back to when MacLeod first became aware of his immortality whilst living in the Highlands of Scotland in the 1500s, where he eventually meets Juan Sanchez Villalobos Ramirez. This gentleman has a rather multicultural past, as he is an Egyptian that travelled to Japan, fell in love with a princess, got a special sword, went to Spain, presumably got a new Spanish name at this point, and then went to Scotland to meet MacLeod. Ramirez is played by none other than Sean goddamn Connery himself. And in typical form for Connery, he doesn't bother with trying to do an accent in any of the places that Ramirez has supposedly come from or been to.
Haggis? What is haggis?
MacLeod and Ramirez become close friends, and Ramirez teaches MacLeod how to sword fight. He also teaches him about the ways of the immortals and of the Quickening, so that he will be prepared when the Kurgan finally comes along. The Kurgan had actually mortally wounded MacLeod during a previous battle between two Scottish clans, But when MacLeod didn't die from his injuries and actually continued, well, talking and breathing, his superstitious kinsmen cast him out from their clan, believing him to be in league with the devil himself.
Burn the witch!
She turned me into a newt! I got better. Ramirez recognises that the Kurgan is someone who is purely evil, and if he was to win the prize, then the entire world will become shrouded in darkness and all hell will break loose. Surely nothing like that would happen if someone good and as pure as Connor MacLeod was to win the prize instead.
You should see what happens in Highlander 2 then.
MacLeod? You created that monstrosity?
By the end of the film, centuries later, it is all down to MacLeod and the Kurgan. Both of them have become more powerful over the years, and the Kurgan had actually killed some immortals that MacLeod had become buddies with, including Ramirez himself. After a long battle, MacLeod finally defeats his longtime enemy and gains the prize. In doing so, he becomes mortal so that he can live, grow old, and have children, which immortals were not able to do. And of course, throughout the film, we get to listen to an awesome soundtrack by Michael Kamen and the band Queen, featuring numerous songs that they wrote especially just for this film.
So, with all of that in mind, with all the immortals gone, and with our hero now gained the prize and the chance to live happily ever after, how on earth could you possibly make a sequel to this? Well, I hope you are all sitting comfortably, because this is where things start to get a bit messy.
So, we are now in the distant future of 1999.
Oh wow!
The ozone layer has depleted to such an extent that millions of people have died due to the excessive UV radiation. Amongst those that have died is Brenda Wyatt MacLeod, who was the love interest of our hero Connor MacLeod from the previous film. And because the actress didn't want to come back for the sequel, we instead get a completely different person with her face covered up. Brenda's dying wish is that Connor uses his vast and boundless knowledge that he obtained from winning the prize at the end of the first film to save the world and resolve the problem of the extreme sunlight. So, Connor brings together and supervises the best scientists in the world to create a giant electromagnetic shield that will cover the entire planet and block out the sun's harmful rays. Which it turns out was actually a terrible thing to do, because even though the Earth has now been saved, it's now horrendously dark and humid all the time. I mean, who knew, right?
Right, I feel as though I should put on a lab coat for this bit. Here comes the science bit. So the problem with blocking out the sun, in such a way as this movie is doing, is that our entire source of temperature and water cycle is, you guessed it, controlled by the sun. So, if there's no water cycle, then all the water would just remain in the sea. There would be no clouds, so they wouldn't just be having a humidity problem. The entire planet would be a complete desert wasteland on Earth. The solution is actually much worse than the problem. Connor MacLeod, ladies and gentlemen, our hero and saviour.
Thanks for turning the world to shit there. So, fast forward to the year 2024.
Oh my god.
Oh god.
Oh god, that's this year?
That's this year, isn't it? Oh crap.
Oh.
And by this point, the management and maintenance of the shield has now been taken over by the not sinister sounding at all Shield Corporation, who are only concerned about earning profits and holding back crucial information that the shield around the Earth is in fact no longer needed, since the ozone layer has essentially healed itself. Of course, the Shield Corporation are wanting to keep quiet about that so that the vast quantities of cash that is paid to them for the Shield's upkeep continues to pour in. Wow, look, a corrupt government in the year 2024 that's stealing as much money as they can behind the general public's back? What are the chances of that happening?
There would be a public outcry about this, but MacLeod built the shield without an off switch.
Wow.
Excuse me for a moment.
Oh dear, oh dear.
I'm fine now. And in fact, even attempting to turn it off could blow up the...
Could what?
blow up the world.
Oh, brilliant. Brilliant.
Ladies and gentlemen, Connor MacLeod, our hero and saviour. Oh God, he really thought of everything, didn't he?
You're nothing but a tired old man.
More than you know.
And what of MacLeod? What happened to the man that saved the world? Well, he's now become a tired, liver-spotted, frail old man who is heading out to the opera and is just counting down his last days of life. By the way, despite the heat wave and the 99% humidity, people are still wearing tuxedos to the opera. As Connor sits there watching the performances, he then gets flashbacks of his previous life, 500 years ago, on his home planet of Zeist.
I'm sorry, what now?
Yes. By the way, I don't know if we've mentioned this, it turns out all the immortals from the previous film were in fact aliens from another planet. Didn't you know that?
Didn't mention that in the first film.
No. It's not mentioned at all in Highlander 1 because it comes out of absolutely fecking nowhere in Highlander 2, completely destroying the mythology of everything that was established in the first film. And this is like in the first 15 minutes that this is happening.
Oh God. So on the planet of Zeist, a meeting is being held to discuss the rebellion against its current ruling dictator, the ruthless General Katana, played by the fantastic Michael Ironside, who is always great at playing villains, especially psychotic ones.
To give him credit, Michael Ironside is trying his absolute damn best to be a great villain, and for that he is one of the film's few highlights. Katana, however, just really comes across as a poor imitation of the Kurgan from the previous film, one that's more of an annoyance than any real threat to MacLeod. And it's like Ironside was asked to base his performance entirely around doing a rip-off of Jack Nicholson as the Joker from Tim Burton's then very successful 1989 Batman film. He spends the majority of the film just making silly faces or chuckling smugly to himself.
He does actually, yeah. And also Katana's name just happens to be the name of a sword on Earth. Funny that, isn't it? The rebels' leader, Juan Sanchez Villalobos Ramirez, chooses a man of great destiny, Connor MacLeod, to carry out the crucial mission against the enemy forces in a bid to overthrow the wicked general. And yes, those are their names on this alien planet as well.
So, one character is still called MacLeod.
Yes.
Even though he's not living in Scotland at this point.
Yes.
And another character is still called Ramirez.
Yes.
Even though he's not yet an Egyptian guy that would later get a Spanish name, because it turns out that was his name all along on this alien planet.
Yes.
That's like if Clark Kent was always called Clark Kent when he was living on Krypton before he met Ma and Pa Kent. Also, isn't it funny that Connor doesn't recognise Ramirez when he later turns up in Scotland during the events of Highlander 1? I mean, it essentially means that all of those moments from the first film when MacLeod first met Ramirez, learnt of his true nature, and built up all that character development are now all completely retconned. It turns out they already had some sort of weird civil partnership thing going on using magic space honey. Or something.
Yes, they were really hetero life mates. Who knew? Anyway, despite being chosen to lead the resistance, Connor's mission basically fails big time about 5 minutes in. I mean, I can't think why. He had such a great plan to run slowly at the soldiers with laser guns and hope for the best. How could that possibly fail?
So he and Ramirez, along with presumably several others, are captured and put on trial for their crimes by the priests of Zeist, who sentence them to be exiled to the planet Earth to take part in the pursuit of the prize, where they will feel oddly compelled to seek each other out and knock off each other's blocks. And whoever's still able to wear a turtleneck sweater at the end will win the prize. Hence the events of Highlander 1. The victor will be given the choice to either grow old and die on Earth as a mortal, or be allowed to return to Zeist. So even though this same film establishes that Connor used the power of the prize to save the world and build the shield, the prize has also been retconned to being a choice between either dying slowly or being allowed to go back home to Zeist. And I don't know why anyone would choose to return to Zeist, considering that it looks like an absolute shithole.
So yes, the punishment for treason on Zeist is not something traditional like hanging, beheading, or the tried and tested method of being hung, drawn and quartered. Oh no, the punishment is instead to be sent to another world that actually looks a lot nicer than the one that they're currently on. Oh, and also, you'll be immortal as well. Yes, can't forget about that. Now, you wonder why the rebellion seems to involve the vast majority of the planet's population. Oh, and this was 500 years ago. But the timelines between the planets of Earth and Zeist line up very differently for some reason, because they can teleport there, and oh look, there's just no explanation for any of this at all.
Yeah, this has not been well thought out at all, has it? And as you can imagine, Highlander fans were absolutely furious with the changes that had been made to the mythology of the first movie, retconning everything that had been established in Highlander 1 into oblivion within the space of its first 15 minutes. This is the film that had such bad continuity, it's arguably a reboot. I know we're on about doing a reboot with Henry Cavill, but we've technically already had a reboot. This was it. This was it. Anyway, in another prime example of how even sillier this film script is, General Katana, in all his wisdom, then decides that now, 500 years later, is the right time to send a pair of immortal hitmen to Earth to kill Connor McLeod. Immortal hitmen that look like a couple of cyberpunk porcupines and laugh like the weasels from Who Framed Roger Rabbit, for some reason.
This is evil villain logic so stupid that even the hitmen are questioning this. They could just literally leave Connor McLeod to die himself. I mean, Katana has left him alone for over 500 years. What's the harm in leaving him for a few more weeks? He's an old man now, will likely be keeling over dead from natural causes soon anyway. But Katana doesn't care. Being an incredibly stupid villain, he's decided that he just wants McLeod to be killed, and then sends his minions to Earth anyway for reasons.
So upon the weasel hitmen landing on Earth, Connor is now no longer the one and soon realises he's immortal again, when a cut received from a broken bottle quickly heals up on its own. Upon dispatching of his two would-be assassins, the first one entirely being by accident, McLeod is revived back to his youthful and immortal self via the Quickening, just in time for an attractive young scientist slash eco-terrorist to turn up called Louise Marcus, played by Virginia Madsen. Marcus used to work for the S.H.I.E.L.D. Corporation, but was fired for asking too many questions, and has since discovered the truth about the ozone layer and the secrets that the S.H.I.E.L.D. Corporation have been keeping from the rest of the world.
So, just so we're on the same page here, literally the only reason why McLeod is young and immortal again is because Katana sent down to Earth the only thing that can return Connor McLeod back to being young and immortal, which is, yes, you've guessed it, another immortal.
After all this time, I was ready to kick back, grow old, and die. Then you send those spunks down here. You changed everything.
Two of them.
Two, in fact. Now, Katana. Come on, please. Do you remember who Connor McLeod is? The guy who is exceptionally well renowned for sword fighting and killing other immortals. For crying out loud, Katana. Even your own henchmen were pointing out the flaw in your plan.
So now, back to his youthful and immortal self. What's the first thing that Connor McLeod does? Why, he does some weird alleyway grinding with Louise Marcus, someone he's only known for 5 minutes. They just fuck for absolutely no reason at all, right there in the streets. Okay. So, once they've gotten that out of their system, McLeod and Marcus realise that they now must team up in order to stop the evil S.H.I.E.L.D. Corporation, along with the threat of General Katana, who has realised what an absolute fuck-up he's made, and so he's decided to come to Earth and finish what he started.
But Connor isn't the only immortal good guy around now, because his old friend and mentor Ramirez has, for some reason, just come back to life after Connor yelled out his name during his quickening. God, that sounds wrong, really, doesn't it?
Oh God, what an image.
Interesting. Sounds really, really wrong. Right, it's kind of like asking the question, whose name do you call out for in your quickening?
So he could have called it out while he was doing his alleyway grinding with Louise Marcus, you know.
I wasn't going to go there.
Ramirez!
God. Right, what?
And I thought I was the one that had the dirty mind on this episode. I think I'm starting to become a bad influence on you.
It's all your fault, damn it. So, because... Now, why is this? Why is this indeed? Because MacLeod and Ramirez have an unbreakable bond. Or something. Yes, not wanting to let a couple of silly, trivial things stand in the way, like all the other immortals were killed off in the last film, or one of the main characters on the poster is dead, Highlander 2 points out that Sean Connery's character can in fact resurrect himself, ironically making him more immortal than when he was actually an immortal, just from Conor McLeod shouting out his name during his quickening. Ramirez comes back to life in the very same spot where the Kurgan slayed him in the first film, except now there's a production of Hamlet being performed, which Ramirez unknowingly takes part in, although apparently there was no swearing in 15th century Scotland.
What's your fucking game, shithead?
Shithead? What's a shithead?
Hang on a minute, Sean. If you're an alien, then why do you sound like you're from Scotland?
Lots of planets have a Scotland.
Upon walking into the finest and oldest tailor shop in all of Scotland, it turns out that Ramirez's pearl earring is valuable enough to not only pay for the finest fitted suit known to man, but also a limousine to take him to the airport and a first-class plane ticket from Scotland to New York. This all happens while Sean Connery sits on his ass, drinking scotch, smoking cigars, and still getting paid to do this film. $3 million for 2 weeks' work. Nice work if you can get it.
Go on, mate! Drink as much as you like! And on at closing time, they give him a wage packet! Lucky bastard!
Hang on a minute. How does he manage to fly to New York? He doesn't even have a passport.
Well, no passport, no ID, no boarding pass, and he's carrying a sword, which I don't think will pass for carry-on luggage. Seriously, Luke, I think we're putting more thought into the script of this movie than the actual script writers did. In fact, even in the Wikipedia summary for Highlander 2, there's a sentence that says, his earring is apparently worth enough money to buy a new suit of clothes and a plane ticket to New York. I mean, when Wikipedia's thrown you some shade, you really know that your film has started to become ridiculous.
Oh yeah, and by the way, everywhere else on the planet looks like a shithole. Scotland? Fine. Make of that what you will. And I'm very, very aware that we are recording this the day before England versus Scotland in the Six Nations. It's the Calcutta Cup tomorrow.
That's it.
Bring it on.
Scotland, it turned out, did very well.
Oh, and also it's at Murrayfield as well,
yeah.
Which is not a shithole, it's a wonderful stadium. It really, really is nice. Anywho, much better than Twickenham.
But it turns out Scotland fared better than New York with this sort of shield thing going off.
It's probably independent by then.
Yes, it probably is.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the plot has become so convoluted that even Marcus now has to spend a bit of time trying to decipher it for the benefit of the audience.
You're mortal there, but you're immortal here until you kill all the guys from there who have come here, in which case you become immortal here. Again.
Something like that.
At no point has anyone writing the script sort of taken a step back and gone, do you know what, lads, I think this is starting to get a bit convoluted now.
It's like you should have stepped back. Do you know something, lads? I think I've disappeared at my own arse here. And if you also think about it, I mean, really think about it, you'll spot more and more inconsistencies cropping up throughout the film. For example, if people from Zeist are immortal on Earth, but not on Zeist, how the hell has General Katana been alive for 500 years? He should have been dead at least 4.5 centuries ago. And why does the golden rule about the immortals being forbidden to fight on holy ground still count? It's now established that they come from another planet entirely, so why would they give a shit about our holy ground? Anyway, moving swiftly on.
Again, we're putting more thought into this
massively
than the people who wrote the script.
Yeah.
Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. If you don't take it out and use it, it's going to rust.
Upon Connor and Ramirez being reunited, our heroes break into the headquarters of the S.H.I.E.L.D. Corporation, only to find themselves trapped in a room with a giant fan in it. Now, this looks like something out of a Looney Tunes cartoon, or an episode of Batman from the 1960s. I mean, all we're missing here is Adam West and Burt Ward in their superhero costumes.
How will they get out of this trap? Tune in next time. Same bat time, same bat channel. Ramirez sacrifices himself to ensure that McCloud and Marcus can escape, even though the room is already quite clearly escapable because McCloud and Marcus are able to just walk through a door. There is no reason why Ramirez couldn't have just followed them through the same door. Maybe Sean Connery finally had enough at this point and said, "Look, just kill off my character, will you? Even Zardoz was less of a confusing mess than this."
Will I ever see you again?
Who knows, Highlander? Who knows?
In other words, he's saying, trust me, you won't be able to afford me for any further sequels.
Also, how fitting is it that the Scottish anthem, Amazing Grace, plays on bagpipes for a character that's actually Spanish?
I'm not Spanish, I'm Egyptian.
You said you were from Spain.
Eventually, the good guys triumph, the S.H.I.E.L.D. Corporation are overthrown, McCloud once again says there can be only one, just because. General Katana's head parts company from his shoulders, the S.H.I.E.L.D. is blown up, the planet Earth is saved, and in one of the film's more bizarre alternative endings, known as the Fairytale Ending, Connor magically now has become Peter Pan and can teleport back to his home planet of Zeist, taking Marcus with him. They become pure light, kiss, head off into the stars, and everything is just fine. Even though Zeist was kind of an apocalyptic shithole when Connor originally left it 500 years ago, and there's no reason why it wouldn't have gotten any better during that time.
Oh, and there's another ending where he just kind of solves the problem and it freeze frames on him smiling. Christopher Lambert smiling. That's it. It solves everything. Now, I really wish I was making this up. So, what we gave you there was mostly the synopsis for the theatrical cut of the movie. There are actually several other different cuts of this movie, but we'll get to those in a moment. But let's talk about, first of all, the reaction about this, the original theatrical version, as we reflect on
what have we watched here. Oh, good lord. Well, you might be surprised to learn that the movie was an absolute box office bomb. I mean, I know, I'm as shocked as you are. Only just
Makes no sense.
Yeah. You would have thought, this would have done well, but no, it only just managed to crawl back the money to cover its budget of $34 million. Now, this was considered to be a very high budget at the time, and it was actually larger than a lot of other movies released that year that also had a lot of big budget special effects. And some of these movies were even existing franchises. So just for comparison's sake, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, The Secret of the Ooze, $25 million.
That's a piece of shit.
The Addams Family, $30 million.
Great movie.
Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, $20 million.
Great movie.
Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, $30 million. Highlander 2 had a bigger budget than all of those movies. And it wasn't too far how much The Rocketeer cost to make, about 35 to 40 million. Oh Christ, that's another film for another potential future episode, isn't it?
I love The Rocketeer.
I do too, but
I love it.
I think it's only become like a fan favourite now, hasn't it? It wasn't appreciated at the time.
No, it wasn't.
But it definitely is now. I think that might have to go on the on the watch list.
Love The Rocketeer. So the film was completely slammed with terribly negative reviews at the time. The great Siskel and Ebert, whom we've mentioned here a few times on our show, were particularly cutting with their criticism. Not only did the film make it to their worst movies of 1991 list, but the late great Roger Ebert was quoted as saying the following: "This movie has to be seen to be believed. On the other hand, maybe that's too high a price to pay." Highlander 2 The Quickening is the most hilariously incomprehensible movie I've seen in many a long day. A movie almost awesome in its badness. That is pure poetry.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely not intended as a compliment. I dread to think what the score for Rotten Tomatoes was on this. It can't be any lower than Santa with Muscles. It can't be any lower.
Let's just have a quick look then, shall we? Okay. Well, this is a first for us, Luke. The critic score for Highlander 2 is actually 0%.
Oh, wow! So it is worse than Santa with Muscles.
But the audience score is 23%, which is the same as Santa with Muscles. The original Highlander got a very respectable 79%. So that's a massive fall in percentage. So go on, Luke, would you rather watch Highlander 2 or Santa with Muscles? Because I think we've established Santa with Muscles is like the lowest of the low.
I am going to say something rather bold here.
Okay.
I'm going to be bold. I would rather watch this film again than Santa with Muscles. Given the choice between Hulk Hogan trying to act and Sean Connery not giving a shit and just phoning it in, there's really no comparison. Connery on his worst day is still 1,000 times more convincing than everybody's favourite racist hot dog brother. Connery clearly didn't give a toss about the film. He's phoning it in. More than that time he did the opening narration for the first film whilst he was sat in his bathroom in his house in Spain. Yes, folks, the opening narration for Highlander 1 is Sean Connery sitting on his toilet.
I mean, you couldn't make that up, could you? In fact, all of the performances throughout this film are bad. Even Virginia Madsen, who normally is very good, comes across as awkward and wooden in this. She later admitted that she only did the film because A, she got a free holiday to Argentina out of it.
Fair enough.
And B, she got to work with Sean goddamn Connery.
Which is fair enough.
The only person that comes off well in this is Michael Ironside, who, again, as mentioned earlier, is just doing his absolute damn best with the material that he's been given. He knew that the film was a load of shit from reading the script, but the money was good. And he decided that he was just going to have a good time and be the most memorable part of the film, which he achieved. And as we mentioned during our review of The Wicker Man, Christopher Lee once said that every actor has to make terrible films from time to time, but the trick is never to be terrible in them. Ironside's performance in this isn't terrible. In fact, he's probably the highlight of the entire film. Also, I don't think we've mentioned this yet, but Dr. Cox from Scrubs is in the film too. Now, for some reason, John C. McGinley decided to do either his best Orson Welles impersonation or just the worst Orson Welles impersonation possible, depending on your point of view. And let's say it's a wonder they had the balls to call him Dr. Cox after this film.
Also, there are so many weird things in this film that they just don't add up with its visual design and ideas. It's almost like the producers watched a load of 80s action movies set in a dystopian future and said, yep, we want that in our film too. The battle sequence on Zeist looks like something that's been ripped off from Dune. There are loads of these comical commercials being shown on television that have clearly been inspired by RoboCop, and the futuristic New York City is a cross between Tim Burton's Batman and the majority of what you see in Blade Runner.
But the film had much bigger problems than some poor acting and a dodgy new backstory for the Immortals. As we often like to do on this show, we like to talk about the stories that went on behind the scenes. And oh boy, there are some real doozies here. So do be sure to come back in part 2 to find out about the various problems with filming in Argentina, including numerous recreational issues and injuries behind the scenes, not to mention that the bonding company that was in charge of the film's budget actually ended up shutting down production entirely after Argentina's economy literally crashed overnight. And we'll even spend a bit of time discussing the different versions of the film and some of the various other sequels and spin-offs that occurred afterwards. Because, believe it or not, this wasn't the end of the Highlander franchise. Anyway, see you in part 2.